Welcome to Rally the Cause, a podcast where we learn from top leaders and marketing experts in the nonprofit world. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, everyone. It's Jeff Rum here. I am the host of Rally the Cause. It's a podcast where I talk to top leaders, executives, mentors, teachers, about their journeys and about what the world looks like today. Today, I have with me a very special guest, Rae Ringel. Rae and I go way back. She's a certified executive coach, founding president of the Ringel Group. She's a faculty member at the Georgetown University Institute for Transformational Leadership, and founding director of the certificate program in the art of facilitation and design. Rae is in high demand and as an innovator in the areas of coaching, facilitation, and training across sectors, including both the corporate and nonprofit communities. She enables a growing list of executives in some of the most successful Fortune 500 companies, nonprofit and government agencies to become more effective managers and stronger communicators with a formidable leadership presence. Rae, I'm so excited to have you here today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So we were just talking before we started recording that you had mentioned we're in this weird time now, right? Like COVID is hopefully behind us or starting to be, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and organizations have to figure out how they're going to move forward. And you talked about it as moving forward, not going back to normal. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that and what you're seeing with the organizations that you work with?
Sure, absolutely. That's the most important first point, is just language when we're talking about going back and going back. And I feel like even just using that language feels regressive to me. We are not going back to anything. We're moving forward. And what's important to me right now is that people honor what was so hard about the last 15 months. And there was a lot of loss and a lot of pain. And there were also silver linings and a lot of lessons learned. And I want organizations and leaders to really think about the lessons learned and bring those forward when returning to the office. So, for example, I am a believer that anything you do in the room, you can do virtually. Now, there is no one who wants to be in the room more than me. Let me just be clear about that, right? But I've really learned and been able to demonstrate how whatever it is you want to do, you can do virtually. It is not going to be the same. That doesn't mean it has to be worse. What it means is it has to be different. And once you can lean into the fact that it is going to be different, then all the innovation is available to you. Mm-hmm. So when you think about doing more things virtually, you can think about alleviating your budget in terms of travel and expenses, sometimes in terms of office space or meeting space. You can think about carbon footprint, about protecting our environment more by not traveling. And you can think about people working from their place of highest potential. Now, for some people, that's not going to be at their homes. There's too many distractions. But for other people not commuting, that's going to save on a lot of wear and tear on people psychologically, physically. And so can we make more accommodations to help people work from a place of comfort, knowing they can be just as productive, if not more productive, by working remotely? I think what we need to look at is a spectrum around what really needs to remain in the room when we need to be together, when we absolutely can go remote, and when hybrid might be called for, when it's some sort of mixture. And there are wonderful ways to decide what to do in those situations. Like, how do you decide where you should be? And then great skills and tools around how do you execute on each of those. And before I pause, I'll just say, and I said this too earlier, that whenever you are in the business of gathering people, whether that's a supervision meeting or a board meeting or a donor meeting or a larger team retreat. It is something that has to be intentionally designed and beautifully facilitated. And I really want to see that more and more moving forward.
And, Rae, you always seem to be a month or two ahead of where people are now. So you're thinking a lot about this hybrid model or the matrix, right? Of figuring out, okay, what do we do? How do we do it? And what does it look like so that it is beautiful, that it is something that people will remember and really take with them. So what does that look like? What have you designed that you could give us a little bit of maybe a taste of?
Definitely. And so happy to share the matrix with you, and you can send it along with this podcast. So the first thing that I created was literally like a decision tree or a matrix, which is a series of questions to help, depending on how you answer, it helps you determine where you should have your meeting. So in the matrix, the first question is, should you be having this meeting? And if the answer is no, you follow the arrow and it says, do not have this meeting. Now, we're not trying to be kitschy or cute. It's just, there are so many meetings that actually don't need to happen, and people have not thought enough about their objectives to warrant gathering people. So there's a deeper message in there in terms of, should you even be having this meeting? If the answer is yes, then there's a series of questions that you want to ask yourself about what's the task of this meeting? Do they have the technology to be able to be engaged and be included? Can they travel to the meeting? What is the content of the meeting? Is it something that's related to more the human world, I would say, more relational, group building, group forming, or is it more task focused where it's decision making and updates? And so you follow all these prompts, and at the end of the prompt, it leads you to either don't have the meeting, have it in person, do it virtually, or go hybrid. And so that's the first level of this matrix. And then the second thing to think about is level of engagement or intervention. So if you're doing a meeting that is really about a group or a team forming, or they're deep in conflict, conflict mediation, or especially in general donor meetings, which I just want to say, you can do it beautifully on Zoom and you can do it beautifully on the phone. I will always prefer for people to do it face-to-face in live flesh if possible. Those are going to be high up on the spectrum of meeting in person. But when you're doing updates and huddles and briefings and things that are really task focused and information based, even trainings, they really don't need to be in person. Those can either be virtual, or some people can be in the room and some people can be remote. So I've taken maybe 10 or 15 meetings or categories of gatherings of human beings and plotted them along a continuum of a recommendation of where those should be. That's the first step, is just determining what kind of gathering this should be. Then once that's determined, there is a world of skills and tools about how to make people feel included, involved, engaged, how to get them to participate, right? What modalities and exercises can you use to make sure that every voice is heard? And now more than ever, the idea of equitable participation and making sure that every voice is lifted up, now more than ever. It's always been that case for me. I think people are really understanding how important it is to raise all the voices in the room, wherever that room is.
That's great. And, I think about these silver linings that you mentioned earlier. I can't tell you how many board meetings I now attend on Zoom that I probably would have skipped if I were going back to the in-person environment, where it's a lot to ask of someone, especially if they're volunteering, to take the time to travel, to go through traffic, to get to a meeting where it's really just taking in information, right? There's not so much conversation or interaction. And even if there is, we have breakout rooms, there are ways to do it on Zoom. So I really think that I'm hoping that organizations move forward in a way, like you say, which is there might be times when we need to meet in person, but let's learn from this experience and do things in a way, because clearly you see that the attendance goes up,
That's right. That's right. And I think in general, people, leaders or meeting leaders, team leaders, they're thinking about their agenda and what they need to get across and what decisions have to be made. This is a shift in really thinking about participation and engagement. And if you make that shift to think more about how am I going to get those voices in the room And how am I going to make sure people feel included while also getting the work done? It changes your frame in terms of where this meeting should be. Now, you'll hear a lot of people say, I'm going to attend that meeting because I can stay in my pajama bottoms. I'm definitely not an advocate for that. I all these YouTube clips where people stand up and they're in their boxer shorts, I'm not so into it. Slippers, that's fine. But I do think there's something to the fact that people want to be comfortable. And I have actually found that people during COVID, I found much more open and vulnerable in the virtual world. And part of it, I think in the beginning, was that people felt isolated, and they were alone and they really wanted to connect. But then I think what it transitioned to is there's a perceived safety of this screen, right? There's a distance here. I can say more. I can be more honest because I'm not sitting right next to you. And I sort of have this filter or this distance. But here's the irony, Jeff. I'm literally 5 inches away from your face right now. I'm actually closer to you here than I am in the room. And I don't know that people are connecting to that. They're connecting more of like, I'm in my space. I'm comfortable. I have some distance here. I'm going to go in. I'm going to step in. I'm going to take a risk. And I have found that in my work to be the case, especially with the people that I coach. They are much more open and going there with me in this venue than they may have even in the room.
That's so interesting. I never thought about, we are closer than we would if we were sitting down and having
I
coffee.
can see how great your skin looks right now. I mean, It's just glowing. It's amazing.
Thank you. And I love your glasses too. I never would have seen them this close up before. So I think, in the world I'm in, we think a lot about messages and language because the work of marketers is to really tell a story and to use language. Last year, I felt like the language is all about the pivot, right? Like, how are you going to pivot? How are you going to move? How are you going to do things differently? And this year, I feel like we hear a lot about the word hybrid, right? Like, it's going to be a hybrid. We're going to do a little bit of in-person, a little. What does that even look like? Like, I struggle sometimes understanding what a positive, productive hybrid model in terms of meeting could look like. So maybe you could share some thoughts you have.
Yeah. So before even giving tips on hybrid, what's really important to learn about hybrid is that you have to immerse with the people who are not going to be in the room. What it used to be before COVID is we've been doing this for years. We've been doing hybrid. You have your central office, you have your regional offices, and they phone in or they Zoom in. And what happens? They're most of the time looking at the back of the facilitator, right? And they're hearing mumblings in the room and they have FOMO or they feel like second-class citizens. So that's basically what it's looked like up until now. And it does not have to be the case. So before even thinking about what you need to do for the hybrid, my first step on the to-do list is figure out who is not going to be in the room and immerse with them, ask them some questions, questions like, what needs to take place in order for you to feel included, right? Well, what would make you feel like you were in the room? What's going to make this a positive experience for you? Ask them first. Just by the mere fact of asking them, you are already making a huge statement about inclusion and that they are first-class citizens because you're asking. Even if you don't do anything about it, which you will, you are asking the question and showing them that they matter. That's an expression that they matter. So ask them. You don't have to figure this out alone. The second thing before working on the choreography is you need to come up with a set of agreements. And the agreements are for everyone involved in the meeting, regardless of location. And those agreements can be a sort of high level of trust and confidentiality, meaning you have to tell people it's going to be recorded. And if it's going to be recorded, who's going to have access to that recording? That's something you have to have agreements about beforehand. Are you doing name attribution on comments? Are you live tweeting? Really being clear around the boundaries of confidentiality and all the way down to the details around don't turn your head to the camera. Whenever you're speaking, speak to the camera. No side conversations, because that's just bzz, bzz, bzz for the people virtually. So all the way down to literally the technical, how are we going to work this so people feel included? So just going through the exercise of agreement setting also makes the statement that everyone matters and no one has a seat in the nosebleeds, right? So I like to think about hybrid as a stage. And typically, you have the people on the stage, and then you've got your orchestra seats, which are the pricey seats. You've got your mezzanine, which is really only good if you're in the front row of the mezzanine. And then you've got your, you've got your nosebleeds.
The nosebleeds, yeah.
That's right. So that would be an easy way to think about it, right? I want hybrids for everyone to feel like they're on the stage. Not that the people on video are out in the nosebleed, and make sure that like the actor projects their voice to the nosebleeds. How do we create one room? And there's a lot to learn from teachers. There have been teachers who have knocked this out of the park. We actually just published an article in Harvard Business Review that profiles how teachers have done this beautifully in the classroom, and how the corporate world and the nonprofit world needs to learn from the lessons of teachers who have gotten this right. And that is about, first of all, moving your body towards the camera when you're speaking to people virtually, right? And moving back and forth, toggling back and forth with your body. It means having a shared agenda for people who are in the room and people who are virtual. It also means that when you're doing breakout groups, don't take the easy route of having people virtually being in a breakout group and people in the room. It's too easy. It's too predictable. You want to mix it up. Maybe everyone has their own laptop there. So in breakouts, everyone becomes virtual in that moment, and you can really mix it up. So there's so many different ways to do this. But what it's essentially saying is, if you can be in the room, fantastic. If you can't, you are just as important, right? And we want to hear you just as much as everyone else.
That's great. I mean, some of these ideas I think have been out there, but people haven't put them all together.
Yeah.
So hopefully they can learn from this. You talked about nonprofits, and you and I have a special place in our heart for the nonprofit world and mission-driven organizations. We've traveled the world together, and so I find that nonprofits are in an interesting place right now, in that they have to still raise the money, and in some cases they have to raise more money to do the work that they do. And they've had a year of fundraising in a different way than they were used to. What should nonprofit leaders be thinking about as they look forward and move forward into this next phase, and to do their jobs effectively and to make a difference, really do the good work that they do?
I do have a soft spot for nonprofits, so much so that I want to give to every nonprofit I work with, but don't tell them. It's really, I end up not making any money because I fall so in love with their mission. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that on a podcast, but anyway.
I'm with you.
So the first thing that I say to fundraisers always, and even more so now, is we must never apologize, ever, for offering people the opportunity to give and to perform a righteous act and to help the world and to help human beings, or whatever your cause is. We never shrink. We never become small. And what I've been preaching for the last 16 months, when people say, how can I ask for money in the middle of a global pandemic? So the first thing I say is, how can you not? Right? Because when we think about the people that we serve, they're probably suffering more than we are. There's a chain of suffering, if you will. So people need it more than ever. But here's the thing, Jeff, that I feel really strongly about. One of the things that we've learned through COVID that maybe we always knew but didn't want to admit is that nothing is ever really in our control. I mean, we couldn't have dreamed up this pandemic. If we tried, maybe in some sci-fi movie, we couldn't have dreamed. And in the last year, everything felt so out of control. For a while, you would wake up in the morning and read the paper and be like, really? No, really? Everything felt so out of control. Literally, there was nothing we can control. So what I would say to people, that in a time where there's so little that you can control, what is actually the thing that you can control? Focus on the things that you can control in your life. And those are your thought habits and the way that you sort of show up in the world. You can control that. But also giving and asking, you can absolutely ground yourself in that when the world is spinning out of control. That is something that you can own and you can control and you can give. So I found that for a lot of people, when everything was so swirly, to anchor yourself in helping others or to invite people to help others is such a grounding practice when the world seems like it's falling apart. So everything starts from that place, from the attitude place and from the psychology place. Then after that, right, once you're bought into this is more important than ever for a variety of reasons, you keep going and you figure out a way to do it face to face, whether that is Zoom like this, or eventually coming back to meeting in person. Because at the end of the day, outside of food and shelter, human beings just want to be loved and heard. And those are core principles of fundraising, like to really hear people, to support people, and to make a match between what they care about in the world and what you do. Yes, you can convey that in email. You can convey that on the phone, but nothing is more powerful than looking someone in the eye and inviting them to invest in something that they care about, that's aligned with their values. It's always been that way. And I think that we need to lean into the relational piece and the heart piece more than ever.
Yeah. And I was thinking, I met someone outside to do a donor solicitation for an organization that I support. And even though we were both wearing masks, which cover our mouths, the eyes were still open, right? You could still see someone's emotions just by looking in their eyes. And I thought that was really compelling to me. It was a weird situation because I wasn't used to we were first getting out again and doing things face to face. But even with masks on, you can still have meaning.
I think the trick is when we have traumatic events in our lives, I mean, God forbid, a death or even what's happened over the last year. In that moment, we're always thinking about how we're going to change our life and how we're going to shift and how we're going to be different as a result of this. And it's very powerful, but it's fleeting. We just go back to even though we want to change and transform because of that experience, we just get wrapped up in our lives, our work, our kids, our communities. I do feel like it might be different this time because of the sustained sort of trauma and pain that COVID brought. I think that people will come out of this more grateful for life and simple pleasures and what they have and their sense of privilege, and that we need to tap into that generosity that people will be feeling right now because they weathered this storm.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
Let's hope so. So what are, now you don't have to name them, but is there an organization that you've seen do this really well over the past year? You've worked with a lot of groups, a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders. Is there one that comes to mind that you want to share and talk about, and why did they do it well?
Wow, there's so many. I mean, first of all, I think any organization that invested in getting training on how to engage people virtually, I felt like that was a huge win. I'm watching a bunch of nonprofits right now. One in Chicago in particular that has redefined the way that they're working. I don't know the exact details. I'm just learning about it now, but it's like 2 days sort of mandatory in the office, 1 day at home, and then 2 days meeting with your team at a location of your choice. Like you could be at a Starbucks or you could be virtual, but and this is not just for now. They want to do this moving forward. And I think it's so bold to say, let's pilot this. Let's try it out. Let's see if it still works. Let's see if we even get more out of our people. So I'm watching that happen right now. There's so many organizations to point to. I really want to lift up the school that I teach at Georgetown. It's all executive education. And for many of these programs, including mine, in the beginning, I thought, okay, there are some things that I'm willing to do online, but this must be in the room. Like there is no way around it. Human beings need to be together. And I watched every single program at this school at Georgetown. All of a sudden it was, well, it's not going to happen in the room for the near future. And I watched everyone figure out how to teach people, how to build cohorts, how to build connections, and how to really empower and skill people up in the virtual world. And I think why I was so moved was how much loss there was, right? How much letting go of what it was supposed to be, that once you allow yourself to move through the loss of what it was supposed to be, people just knocked it out of the park. And I'll tell you, for example, in my program, we have the option to go back in person in the fall. And we have decided we meet once a month for 4 months, 3 days a month. And we decided that this fall, we're actually the only ones who are going back. Everyone else is staying virtually. We are doing modules 1 and 4 in person and modules 2 and 3 virtually. First of all, to model hybrid, right, and different ways of doing things. We also want our facilitators to be very skilled in virtual, so it makes sense for us. But we have students from all over the world. And so instead of coming to Washington 4 times a year, they only come twice. And that's a huge relief for people. So I think we should reset and get really into like prototyping experiment mode right now. This is the moment to really go into the laboratory and figure out more innovative ways to work that are more accommodating for our workers, and to make sure that we're asking people in all the professional world, what's their preference? What do they want? What do they need? You might not be able to honor it, but even just asking is a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, talk about accessibility. I mean, think about accessibility and diversity, right? Because if you're making this much more accessible to people, you're therefore getting people from all over the globe. And what an advantage to all the students to be part of a much more diverse group of people who have the ability to zoom in from wherever they are and not have the burden of traveling, which
it's so, you become so much more global, you become so much more inclusive. And also, listen, for the introverts out there, always being in the room and maintaining that kind of energy can be exhausting. I mean, it can be exhausting for the extroverts too. There's something about the cadence and the pace of virtual where you can turn off your camera for a little bit, or you can be quiet and still for a bit more. You can go make a cup of coffee or whatever it is. It's something that I think also honors people who have different energies. And that says a lot.
That's really cool. Right. This has been amazing. I love the conversation. I feel like we can go on forever. I always ask this last question to everyone because I think it's important, which is you work a lot. I know you have a busy life, even during this time when we were able to step back a little bit. What do you do on a daily basis? What's your ritual that like centers you or like gives you a way to like just sit and unwind and take a break?
That is such a good question. And thank you for asking. So first of all, I have my micro centering. So whenever I am doing a coaching call or a training or a facilitation, I make sure that I have 5 or 10 minutes beforehand to things like hydrate, make sure I'm not hungry. But I also do like a brain dump. I write down like anything that's on my mind. I mean, I have 4 kids. I run a business, like whatever. If it's like dry cleaners, hip hop class, client proposal, like I just get it down. Confucius said that even the palest ink is better than the sharpest memory, right? So like if I don't write it down, I'm going to obsess over those things. And I teach presence for a living. So I have to make sure that I'm like clearing the highways so I can be really present. And so I feel like I'm doing that all day long because you need me to be fully hearing what you're saying and even hearing what you're not saying. But I also, for me, there's 2 things that are consistent for me. One is the sustaining myself physically. So I happen to be someone who loves to spin. I was an early Peloton rider. I've had one for 4.5 years. I'm just saying.
Wow.
Yep. And
Impressive.
Granted, I don't take any classes with music past 1989 because that's when I stopped playing music. But I, full on Peloton, singing full voice, like that's a big thing for me. I also am a very, very avid student and practitioner of Pilates. I find that practice is something that not only makes me stronger and strengthens my core. So like there's all sorts of metaphors in there, right? It helps me stretch. It helps me be more flexible, nimble, strengthens my core. So I could like write a whole book on leadership and Pilates. So I've coined the term Spilates. It's a mixture of spinning and Pilates. Sometimes I have to do this at like 10:30 at night because my kids won't go to bed. But I really try and practice 5 or 6 days a week. And I find that that's my time. I don't believe in being a martyr. I believe that like I have to take time for myself. My husband and I, one of the things that's been hard for us this year is we usually take a huge epic trip every summer in some like faraway remote place. And we really haven't been able to do that. So we are doing it this summer. Unfortunately, we can't go to most of the exotic places we want to go to. So we're going to Montana. I think it's going to be exotic. And having that time for us to be centered and connected so we can like run our family and run our businesses. We're very committed to like working on our relationship and having that time because a better us makes a better family unit.
Wow, that's awesome. Pilates in Montana. That's what
Pilates in Montana. Next year it'll be Machu Picchu, but for now it's Montana.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom. I learn so much every time we talk. And
well, I want to close with saying it feels like full circle because after being in business for 8 or 9 years and realizing that I needed a website, the first person I went to was Jeff Rum, who created my first website. So you were not only my writer, but you really helped me create my brand and have continued to do so. You really helped me find my voice all those years back. So I'm eternally grateful to you for that.
Oh, that is so kind. And we loved it every step of the way. And so speaking of websites, where can people find you, or if they want to reach out to you for coaching, or if they wanted more information about the program at Georgetown, how does someone find you?
Well, ringelgroup.com is my website, and or Rae@ringelgroup.com. And that's where we would, have an email exchange or definitely hop on the phone and talk about, is it coaching? Is it training? Is it facilitation? Is it design? Is it Georgetown? It's all about figuring out what you need and what the right intervention and support is for you.
Great. Thank you again. And we hope to have you on at some point in the future.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Rae. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Rally the Cause podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.